Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and today we're going to be talking about hi-hats. It's going to be part of a 2-video series. One is going to be about programming the hi-hats, and then the second video is going to be about processing the hi-hats with effects and equalization. In dance music, a lot of things are laid out in groups of 8 or 16 bars. That means that every 8 or 16 bars, something changes slightly in the instrumentation, meaning that some instruments start to play, some instruments stop playing. This gives the feeling that the music is constantly being propelled forward, like there's a direction in the music. If you use hi-hats wisely, that can be one of the tools that can really help shape the energy direction of your song. And so what I want to do now is I want to give you a few different strategies that will help you determine the energy levels of your song. Let's get into it. Before we go any further, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and consider signing up for one of our classes on Underdog.Brussels. We're an online music school, not just a YouTube channel. Now, before we get started, we can lay the foundation by putting a kick and a clap into our track. So the kick and the clap, they follow a very simple pattern, just like this, 4 to the floor kick. So that means a kick on every downbeat and a clap here on every backbeat. So together they sound like this. As a little bonus flair there, what I've done is, on the clap, I've put a little delay that is automated. And so at the very end, you get a little ghost note of the clap there. That's just a little detail to give some depth and dimension to this otherwise very, very static clap. Now, the first hi-hat approach is what I call hi-hat gears. I like to create several layers of hi-hats, which you can activate and deactivate individually. That way you can have 8 bars of one of the hi-hat patterns playing, then add the second layer, then after another 8 bars, add the third layer, then after another 8 bar, remove one of the other layers, then after another 8 bar, remove another one of the layers, and this way you can keep these 3 elements moving in and out of each other and keep the progression of the song interesting by always having some kind of change in the high percussion. The 3 typical classical layers that are very safe bets that you can pretty much always add are, first of all, a hi-hat on the upbeat. The upbeat is the beat halfway between your downbeats. So if your kick drums are on the downbeats, then your upbeats are halfway in between. And so that creates that classical boomts, boomts, boomts pattern. So together with the kick and the clap, you would get something like this. Now, this is the most minimal, simple hi-hat pattern that you could imagine. It is an open hi-hat pattern, and I just took the standard Ableton 909 core kit for this. I'll give you some tips on the sound design of the hi-hats in a moment, but first, let's finish the 3 gears presentation. So, the second of the 3 gears is the 16th note rolling hi-hat. That one triggers every 16th note. And you can choose, sometimes it's wise to put a velocity ramp on there so that you go low velocity, mid velocity, high velocity, so that it goes from quiet to high, also pulsating up on the upbeat. Or you can do that afterwards by adding a shaper like an LFO tool, for instance, which creates that pumping feeling. So this sounds like this, together with the up hat. So that's the second gear. The third gear would be a ride cymbal, which sits on top of this groove. And from that ride, we only want the highest frequencies, just the high splashy energy. So the ride sounds like this. A typical way to program the ride would be every 8th note with an emphasis on the upbeat again. As you can see, pretty much all of the hi-hat groove is typically focused on emphasizing that upbeat in between the downbeats. In this case, I programmed it using the velocity controls. And as you can see with the equalizer, I have moved it up to keep only the highest frequencies. So together, all these hi-hat gears sound like this. Without the ride. With the ride. When you enable the ride, obviously, there's this slightly extra increased layer of energy. And together with the kick and the clap, it sounds like this. So now, like I said, you've got these 3 gears that you can bring in and out interchangeably. Before we move on to the second approach, which is the jacking hi-hats approach, I want to just show you how you can take a little bit more control over the sound design of your hi-hats. To do that, let me show you a simple workflow that will work pretty much every time. What you do is you create yourself a new MIDI track. On that new MIDI track, you're going to find yourself the drum kit that you like. Let's again imagine it's a 909. Find yourself the hi-hat sample, which is named either HH for closed hi-hats or HHO for open hi-hats. You drag that into the MIDI track, which creates yourself a sampler. And now there are a few controls that I want you to take into account. I want you particularly to set the release time to the maximum. That means that the playback of your sound will be independent of the length of your MIDI notes, which is good for drum triggering. I want you to bring the sustain down to 0. And then if you can visualize this curve, you can imagine that the decay parameter now is your master button that tells you how long this sound is going to be. So if I program myself a simple upbeat hi-hat pattern by selecting the area over here, right-clicking, doing insert empty MIDI clip, Control-Shift-M will also work. And then on C3, you program on every upbeat a note. C3 is like the neutral position that tells your sampler to play the sound at its original pitch, which is what we want. When we play this, now the decay parameter tells us exactly how long this sound is. So we can turn an open hi-hat into a closed hi-hat. We can do all sorts of things with this. We can even set an LFO, for instance, to slightly modulate how long this is going to be. That way it's maybe a little bit more organic. To do that, you would just go to Audio Effects, grab yourself an LFO. You would map the LFO to the decay parameter, set the depth really shallow, like maybe 5%. And then just let it play and then use offset to find where the sweet spot is. So it's actually not bad already there. Every single hit is now slightly different than the last one, which is a nice effect because it tells our ear that there's more going on than just a simple out-of-the-box 909 that has been programmed like a machine. Now, beyond the decay control, there's one other control that I want you to be very comfortable with, which is the transpose control. So when you go to controls here, there's this transposition. And transposition, it allows you to pitch up or pitch down your sample. Sometimes just nudging a piece of percussion up or down a semitone or two can suddenly make it gel with your track in a completely different way. So it's really worth experimenting with that a little bit. Sometimes some percussion, when you pitch it down far enough, it becomes a little bit distorted and nasty. Maybe that's something that you want. If you put things up higher, it becomes lighter, more breezy. Sometimes that's what you want. On Ableton Sampler, there's also this random to pan function, which you can sometimes place up a little bit, which slightly pans each individual hit at a random position in the stereo field. That can sometimes give interesting effect, especially on the 16th note hi-hat pattern, because it gives this kind of like a fluttery effect. Now, one word about the equalization of hi-hats. We're going to do that a bit more about that in the next video, but realize that hi-hats are basically very similar to bursts of white noise, which have a lot of high frequency content, which is very high energy and exciting. But if you let it, it also can have a lot of low frequency content, and that's not always what you want. So it's good to have a look on the spectrum analyzer and see where the frequencies are distributed. As you see, this hi-hat has quite a lot of low frequencies when we don't really want that. So either the internal filter on your sampler or just an external equalizer, you can roll those off quite high. There you go. There we're not harming the quality of the sound in any significant way. We're just cleaning up the mid-range for other elements. We'll come back to equalizing hi-hats in the next video. So let's move on to the jacking hi-hats pattern. Jacking hi-hats is what happens when you take a drum machine and you sequence open hi-hats and closed hi-hats in the same hi-hat line. You apply quite a lot of swing, and a phenomenon happens which is called choking. Choking is what drum machines do when they want to simulate how a hi-hat behaves in real life. Now, in a usual drum kit, there is only one hi-hat, and it is either open or closed, depending on the status of the pedal. So logically, that means that you cannot play an open hi-hat and a closed hi-hat at the same time. If you remember, in our 3 hi-hats gear approach, we do play open hi-hats and closed hi-hats at the same time. So instead, if we go for this jacking approach, what we'll do is every upbeat will be probably an open hi-hat, and then in between those upbeats, we'll put shuffly little steps of closed hi-hats, which will cut off the open hi-hat when they get played. As before, I've just used the Ableton 909 Classic kit, and I've programmed something that looks like this. So as you can see, these disactivated notes are just there for my reference. So you've got the kick on every downbeat, the clap on every backbeat, and then an open hi-hat on every upbeat, right? And in between those open hi-hats, on some of those smallest, weakest beats, the individual 16th notes, I've put some swung closed hi-hats. There, 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 and there. And then for added spice, I've put a little rim shot. And together, this sounds like this. The way this open hi-hat gets cut off when the closed hi-hat plays gives a very kind of energetic, short decay kind of an impulse that really pushes the song forward in a dancey direction. Listen to it with the clap and the kick. And so that's the main second strategy for hi-hats, which is this jacking hi-hat strategy. This one doesn't work so much in layers, although you can, of course, activate and deactivate them, but it works very much as one whole, as if it's coming out of one drum machine. Once you go into this kind of jacking house direction, I did feel the need to do another one of those draw the rest of the owl parts that I'm not going to explain too much about, but I've added a whole bunch of old school house sounds using the Korg M1 sampler. So for instance, I've added the perk organ, a piano, and a string. There we go. Now we're vibing. Let's listen to the other hi-hat pattern as well in that context. And there you go. So from this video, I want you to remember that you can layer different layers of hi-hats to give yourself different gears. Use the upbeat hi-hat, the rolling hi-hat, the ride. Be sure to set your release to the maximum, your sustain to the minimum, and use the decay to determine how long you want the sound to be. Try transposing your hi-hats up and down a little bit. Try high passing them. And consider if you want to do the jacking hi-hats approach with shuffle and choking. Although that's not for every genre, it specifically evokes a kind of a house subgenre. In next week's video, I want to give you some strategies for equalizing and processing your hi-hats to give you control over their exact sound. Until then, keep watching one of my other production videos here. Be good to one another, stay producing, and bye-bye.